Hence, if we wish to recapitulate the fruitful and multidimensional essence of Minoan consciousness, to delve into the mists of the past and temporarily experience the world through the eyes of the Panossian astronomer priestesses, it is necessary to reconcile spirit and matter, and base our knowledge of reality on integral and direct experience rather than draw inferences from conceptual actions which base all knowledge on past experience in the manner that our short-sighted orthodox scientists do today. On an inner level, there can be no doubt that the Minoans would have perceived the energies of creation that ordered the anatomy of their own psyche in the outward realm of metals, properties, and other natural markers. Connections that seem entirely nonsensical, heterogeneous and discordant to our ego-orientated minds today formed entirely meaningful, homologous and harmonious relationships in Minoan consciousness, a holistic framework which yearned for unbounded wholeness and reunion with the divine. In this transcendental cosmology, there was an obvious connection between the metal copper, creatures like the scorpion and the octopus, the conch shell, the colours green and turquoise, gemstones like turquoise and emerald, the iridescent hues of the peacock's feathers, apples, the mistletoe plant, and the qualities of beauty, sexuality, desire, harmony, tranquility, and nirvana. Because the qualitative feature that coursed through and manifested through these elements was sensual and aesthetically feminine, the Minoan astronomer priestesses reasoned that they had all been stamped by a magical signature of that power, the power of Venus. Likewise, there was a discernible connection between the metal silver, the element of water, the reproductive and menstrual cycle, heat, electricity, sound, and human thought, which measured and reflected the conceptual world of an individual in quite the same way that the moon reflected the supernal life-bestowing light coming from the progenitor of our solar system, the sun. Given that the aforementioned manifested qualitative markers that were passive, pliable, and mirror-like in nature, then it stood to reason that they had all been stamped by the lunar energy or power. The implications of an energetic syncretization between the planets, the metals, and human consciousness falls way outside the scope of conventionally orientated thought at this point in time. As preposterous as it may seem at first, the idea begins to suspend disbelief if we proceed along the logical avenue that all planetary bodies, including the Earth, are like magnets, and that each exerts a gravitational pull on the others. If one continued along this same train of thought, entirely scientific and credible, I might add, he or she would see that the waxing and waning of this gravitational force is hinged entirely upon the planet's relative position to the outer heavenly spheres. Indeed, humans and all living creatures are unconsciously wired to them, though it appears that only the more intellectually adroit and curiously inclined ever come to terms with this fact during the course of their lives. When the Minoans and all other ancient peoples discerned these living interacting energies that pervaded the cosmos, it mattered not that their naked eye could see no further than Jupiter, or that the sun and moon were erroneously thought to be planets. The celestial spheres were merely exoteric markers for the qualitative powers that governed our multidimensional and majestic universe. Interestingly, this perceptible association between the planetary spheres and their rulership over the metals becomes even more of a reality when we take into account the series of experiments that were conducted by Frau Lili Kolisco, a follower and confidante of anthroposophist Dr. Rudolf Steiner, who lived between 1861 and 1925. Kolisco was convinced that the planet-metal relationship, rudimentary to the holistic cosmology of most primordial cultures, wasn't imagined and illusory at all. It was, on the contrary, real, observable, and quantifiable. She devised a chromatographical method whereby filter papers were used to transcribe or record chemical changes that occurred in metal salt solutions when their celestial constituents entered into conjunctions and oppositions with one another. Under strictly controlled conditions, Kolisco was able to show that the images or pictures produced by the silver salt solutions encompassed a striking resemblance to the crater-ravaged surface of the moon, and that certain characteristics manifested at the appearance of each lunar phase, particularly the full and new moons. In 1978, Agnes Fife used a similar filter paper method to describe whether the annual planetary movements of Venus would have any discernible effect upon 1% copper acetate solutions that had been placed inside extracts of plant sap. Just like the plant enacted its most powerful impressions upon human consciousness when it was allowed to shine in the twilight glow of early morning as the Eosphoros, or bringer of dawn, or late in the evening as the Hesperos, star of the evening, the metallic reactions on the filter papers were stronger when Venus assumed positions in the sky in which it remained unobstructed by the sun. Callisto's experiments used gold chloride and copper salt solutions to discern changes in filter papers during a solar Venusian conjunction were equally astonishing, revealing a dramatic precipitation of light green along the plastic films when Venus was at its highest point in the sky. A curious observation that came to light during the experimentation phase of the solar Venusian experiments was that the reaction rate varied with the changing of the seasons. This was, amongst other things, both odd and unprecedented. How could a chemical reaction vary according to the time of the year? Strange, no? Orthodox science remains curiously silent on such issues, given that its doctrines decree that chemical reactions should not vary with seasonal rotation. Callisto claimed that the strength of the reactions dissipated and disappeared between December and January, only to reappear again stronger than ever between the months of March and May. Safer being the equinoctial marker for spring, the said months comprise the premium time in which the laborious processes of the alchemical great work should commence. Astrologically, it is the period in which the sun rises in the constellation of Taurus, a time in which the Venusian energy becomes most expressive and powerful. As we can see, the occult connections are plentiful and far too meaningful to be purely coincidental. Many of Callisto's experiments, particularly those that trace the Mars-Saturn conjunction, were replicated in 1949 by Theodor Schwenk and again in 1964 by Dr. Karl Voss of Hamburg. Both scholars successively reproduced the same results and dutifully arrived at the same conclusions as Callisto, publishing their works in various astrology journals in an attempt to spur further studies in astrochemistry and eventually integrate these scientifically demonstrable theories into our communal knowledge. Sadly, the implications of such were perceived to be heretical and controversial by the scientific community, and before long, the negative sentiments had spilt over to the greater community, to the literati, university presses, and media, all of whom ignored them completely. The reception of silence ensured that in time, all memory and trace of experimental data in support of qualitative content and the holistic cosmology of our ancestors would be forgotten completely. And on that note, I will see you next time for the continuation of discussion relating to Minoan lunar consciousness. See you then.